Welcome to Screen Sleuths. This is Rob, and I took some time away from helping Dr. Kumagai work on his testimony to deep dive into Presumed Innocent, Episode 4, The Burden. Last week, Chris and I discussed both of our theories around who killed Carolyn, but let's dive back in and take a look at some of the new clues and information from this week. Clearly, one of those questions is not whether or not Brian Ratzer was involved or present when it came to the Bunny Davis case. A case that we're going to have to look into further in the show now, as we also learn Carolyn may have buried evidence and didn't make Rusty aware of it. However, based on Ratzer's reaction at the time of visiting his house, he clearly was aware of what Rusty and Rigo were referring to. Further cementing this is his confrontation at the Savage house. This is something that will more than likely go one of two directions that Chris and I will project. The first being, this becomes a character stain on Rusty during the trial, not that Tommy necessarily needs more ammunition after what we'll cover next. With an outburst like this, of violently beating a man on his porch, it can be used as a strong argument that Rusty is capable of violence due to a hidden rage, especially when driven by his passion. And De La Guardia and Molto could easily spin this into their argument. Alternatively, this could open the window that Rusty had been looking for all along. With Brian now becoming a peripheral part of the case, he can now be linked to the Bunny Davis case, and thus becoming a new suspect in Carolyn's. It would be an unintended consequence that Brian showed up at their home looking to fight, but one that, aside from a possible assault charge, Raymond and Rusty could use as a possible target to shine a light on. That being said, without reopening the Bunny case, I don't see Ratzer becoming a credible misdirect for R&R, so this most likely just makes the defense that much harder for Raymond to fight. Now, to the DNA in the room, or in the fingernails. We have gotten more than a glimpse at the fact that Tommy Molto is more than willing to go low in order to get Rusty on the charges at hand. Could he be stooping to the point of having the medical examiner fake evidence that would further damn Rusty? I believe Tommy would potentially bring himself to it, but based on the characterization we have gotten so far of Dr. Kumagai, I would be hard-pressed to believe that he would falsify the report entirely. Which then makes it even more questionable about how this happened. Now, Rusty seems to be very sincere in his shock about the findings, so between Chris and I, we see this either being a case of Kumagai doctoring the report to a small extent, or, in my opinion, evidence that was completely planted. On the whole, Tommy seems to be very set on pushing towards Rusty, and another piece of evidence that could lean into their case seems almost too good to be true. Could the incentive be for the department as a whole to make sure that someone goes down? Is potentially everyone in on the plan at this point? But to speak further about Tommy, throughout the episode we see him include Eugenia as a witness to try and reiterate the severity of the relationship, as well as work on the line of questioning with Carolyn's son Michael. Tommy seems both very invested in when and why Michael was at her house, but seems taken aback by the fact he had spoken to his mother recently. A question for us as the audience as well, to why Carolyn has been estranged from Michael and why he has to arrange a secretive meetup to begin with. But Tommy appeared even more bothered at the fact that she had started to become afraid of a coworker who she had to spend time around due to working on cases. Was this actually referring to Rusty? Or could that have been Raymond? Or Nico? To me, this reaction was not one of enlightenment, like he had a new piece of evidence for the case, but one of worry. Carolyn was concerned about Tommy, because Tommy had an infatuation with her. He was jealous of her and Rusty's relationship, and now that he's aware of it, and wants to learn all he can, thus bringing Eugenia into the mix as well. Now don't get me wrong, I don't say this to pin the murder on Tommy, but to point to even more reason why he is fighting so hard to convict Rusty of the crime. I will shift my focus, however, to the one who I do believe was the killer. Barbra. We spend a lot of this episode seeing the ways that Barbra is coping with the situation and potentially trying to move forward. Spending time with the bartender, Cliff, and working to put Kyle in with their therapist. A move that we eventually see backfire when Dr. Rush tells her she should seek help from a new therapist, but we first, however, do get a bit of character analysis from Dr. Rush. By pointing out that Barbra seems to already resent Rusty for what he's done, with Carolyn punished and out of the picture, and Rusty being ruined, It could lead to the logic that she'd be killing two birds with one stone if he was convicted of the crime. Lastly, I just want to touch on a couple of other moments that lead me to believe the finger is starting to point more and more in Barbara's direction. We don't get the full conversation between her and Kyle after Rusty's family interrogation. This leaves a very large window in the timeline that we may still be missing, especially if Kyle ran into the back of Carolyn's car, which seemed to happen in the flashback that I admittedly had a good chuckle at. We also have a lot of exposition in these episodes about Rusty and Barbara's relationship. Why she is still fighting to be with him, how she must still love him. From someone with my perspective, that she is the guilty person in the situation, it could point to a possible tactical decision on her part to have privilege between her and her husband should anything happen. Lastly, speaking of Kyle's bike, we see Barbara feverishly cleaning this in the garage after the discussion around Kyle's potential involvement. Now, her explanation centered around concern for their son. But if Barbara had for some reason been at the scene, she may have been more worried about a possible connection back to her. Now, I could be crazy, and I could be a little laser-focused on my theory, and I could hear that explanation too. Before I go, Chris and I have another question that we want to open up for your opinions on. Jaden, Kyle's sister and Rusty and Barbara's daughter, she seems to be present in a lot of the home scenes, but never in focus, like when she's just listening through the wall during the conversation with Kyle. But do you think she will potentially play a bigger role going forward? And as usual, we want to hear what you all think, so tell us your theories and who the killer may be in the comments. And while you're at it, if you like our content, take a moment to like and subscribe to make the case to the ultimate judge, the algorithm, that we are on the right track. And until next time, stay sleuthy.